Good evening. Hi. We just, yeah, there we go. Just give it a minute while people are joining. I hope you're having a good week. It's the fourth night of our virtual church holiday. This is normally been over the years that we were gathering together at some campsite somewhere. A strange evening. We typically on Thursday we'd have a big barbecue together, and then in the evenings you meet. There's a sort of sense of we're coming towards the end of something. We're heading towards a culmination, a kind of an end point, a conclusion, and also we're thinking about going home and getting the tents packed down and all the different things that happen. So it's quite a strange night. It still feels like we're in the middle of something, but we're heading towards something. And tonight, very much in the talk, it's going to have a little bit of that. We're heading towards an end point, an outcome, a conclusion, if you like. But the other thing that's true about this sort of series, where we just very intensively for a week we sort of focus around an idea or a theme or a concept, is to be saying all the time, what difference will it make next week? Or actually, what difference does it make tonight? What difference will it make tomorrow? What difference will it make to my community, to my relationships, to my fellowship, to my focus, to the way in which I communicate my faith to the people amongst whom God has placed me? And so, as we go into tonight, I really want to encourage you to do that with tonight's thoughts. I'm going to deal with it in more detail actually as we go through the study, but I also want to say this at the outset. What I'm not talking about tonight is tolerating people unloading responsibility on you which isn't from God. And if anything, this session is actually dealing with the fact that I believe religion does that a lot. And some of the things I'm going to say are because I think culturally we have shifted too far away from the example of Jesus in terms of setting boundaries and caring for our own well-being. In that we have, in an effort to reverse some of the really negative, unhelpful slave mindset that we spoke about earlier on in this week, been tempted into a mindset that still only assesses our capacity, our capability by our own abilities. Nevertheless, in any group of people, there is always a risk of people loading somebody unfairly in a way that is not intended to be helpful, and also in a way that isn't actually seeking resolution, to just load somebody with their issues, with their burdens. And if you're in that position, then I pray that God enables you to step out from underneath it. Again, we'll come back to this later in the study, but I want to say from the outset, Jesus doesn't call us to take anybody else's yoke or burden or bondage or weight or slavery upon us. He tells us to take his yoke upon us and to learn from him. For his yoke is easy, and we will find rest for our souls. That's not to say that his yoke is empty. It's not to say that if we consider what he is giving us a share in his work, if we were to consider it according to our own strength, that it would seem simple or light. But the reality is it must rest on him, not us. And if you have that feeling that you're around people that are demanding that it rest on you and are not interested in allowing Jesus to deal with the burden, they want to perpetuate it, continue it, and not receive those things that Scripture says are available for them, then I would encourage you to seek the will of God about whether or not you should be in that. You need to have people around you that will point each other to Jesus, point you to Jesus, but also will encourage you to live not under a heavy burden, but to lay that down and to step under the yoke of his purpose and his life lived out in your life. Tonight's session, we've called it Trust, Not Triage. And so we ought to start off by thinking a little bit about what triage is. An optimistic, charitable, very much looking for the best in everything explanation of the concept of triage might define it like this: the assessment of incoming medical cases such that priority is given to those most urgently in need of care. And I'm pretty sure if you were to ask somebody who works in triage and who is conscientious and sincere, they would have that view of it. But the reality is that triage is only actually necessary, it's only ever actually applied to incoming cases when there is a need to prioritize staff, resources, beds in hospitals, whatever it is, because those resources are limited. And so they are prioritized, and they are prioritized generally to patients who are deemed most likely to survive. Actually, in a military context, they are applied to patients whose survival is deemed to be most desirable, which sounds horrific and dehumanizing because it actually is. At its best, it's an economic assessment of the value of providing treatment. So then it would be a little surprising if that ever was to creep into the way in which religious groups, different fellowships, denominations, communities began to look at the way in which they chose to meet or engage with the needs of the community or the people to whom they've been sent. Yet sadly, increasingly, and in groups that I've been connected to and involved with, people that I love dearly, nevertheless, what I see more and more is that this triage mindset, and this ugly, devaluing, dehumanizing mindset is being brought to bear. And so tonight we're going to have a look at why Jesus' approach is so completely different. I want to start in Mark 3, reading from verse 7. But Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him, and from Judea, and from Jerusalem, and from Idumea, and beyond the Jordan, and those from Tyre and Sidon, a great multitude. When they heard how many things he was doing, they came to him. So he told his disciples that a small boat should be kept ready for him because of the multitude, in case they would crush him. And he's not talking apply a little bit of pressure. He's really talking being trampled in the rush. For he healed many, so that as many as had afflictions pressed about him, trying to touch him. And the unclean spirits, whenever they saw him, fell down before him and cried out, saying, "You are the Son of God." But he sternly warned them that they should not make him known. And he went up on the mountain and called to him those he himself wanted or chose, and they came to him. Then he appointed 12, that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have power to heal sicknesses and to cast out demons. Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. And they went into a house. Then the multitude came together again, so that they could not so much as eat bread. But when his own people heard about this, they went out to lay hold of him, for they said, "He is out of his mind." Remember, this is Jesus who said of his own work, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." This is Jesus who spoke of his relationship to the purpose of the Father, the way in which he served, as being a status in which you find rest for your soul. But his practical situation is that the crowds, the demands placed upon him are such that he is concerned he might be physically crushed. And he's so busy and so overwhelmed in the eyes of his disciples and those that care about him that he can't eat. And so the sheer scale of Jesus' ministry appeared so completely unachievable that his friends staged an intervention, or at least they tried to. And not just once either. We're going to look at another one later. I don't know how your life is, how your service is. But if you've been on this road for any length of time, there will be times when, if you look at the scale of the needs around you, or you look at the demands that you perceive the world might place upon you, or religion might expect of you, or maybe the standards to which you set yourself, they will seem utterly unachievable. And there are times when the people that love you will quite rightly want to stage an intervention. Jesus is there. But then look at the scale of his response to that need, because the scale of his response is staggering. These same events are also recorded by Luke and Matthew. Luke wrote this, and the whole multitude sought to touch him, for power went out from him and healed them all. Now, the word for healing there, iomai, is to cure. It's to make someone whole. It's to completely remove anything that is damaging, destructive, harmful, or in any way wrong. It's applied spiritually to speak of complete deliverance from sin. The whole multitude sought to touch him, and power was going out of him and was curing, making them whole, healing them with almost no other intervention on his part. No wonder the crowd were trying to crush up against him. But he healed them all. Matthew 12:15 writes this, but when Jesus knew of the Pharisees' plot to kill him, he withdrew himself from there, and great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all. Now there, the word that is translated as healed is therapeuo. That means to serve. It's really a word that speaks about treatment. So iomai is like an instant cure. It's like being the medicine that someone takes and everything is corrected. But therapeuo is to serve somebody and to restore them to health, to literally to care for them. It says, and he cared for them. He ministered to them all. He acted in his role. Remember, he's taken the form of a servant. He's poured all of himself out, and the Father has poured all of himself in. And now Jesus is serving the needs of the crowd. This is the crowd that he fears might crush him accidentally. This is in the context that the Pharisees are trying to kill him. He doesn't know, in the natural, you'd say anybody in his position wouldn't have any idea if all of a sudden the crowd, somebody in there would be ready to harm him or do him harm. But no, as long as they're not physically actually standing on top of him, he's going to stay there and let that crowd get what they need. There are two profoundly challenging aspects of these actions, and Jesus' response to this overwhelming situation of need and of ministry and of demand that really, I come back to these so often. The first one is this: in the face of a considerable and credible threat from the Pharisees, Jesus, who, let's be clear, is God of gods, Jesus who cannot be harmed or touched in any way if he decides he doesn't choose to be, Jesus who, even when they came to arrest him in the garden, they couldn't get close to him. Every time they tried, they just were just flattened by the presence of God himself. Jesus didn't make a stand, but withdrew himself. Yet at no point did he turn the crowds away if they came to find him. He didn't stick around for the confrontation with the Pharisees, but when the multitude came looking for him, he was found. And he met every single need. You know what a sad contrast that is. There's so many today who would wear themselves out fighting some religious or pseudo spiritual secular battle. They would give their resources, they would put their money into organizations just to fight the enemy, fight the argument, fight those who they consider would be opposed to their faith. But when you ask them to commit their own time, their own homes, their own energy to the care of those who need healing, who need deliverance, who need the touch of the power of God, they draw strict limits as to what's appropriate and what they're prepared to do. Jesus says, I'm not going to take the fight on. I don't need to. I'm going to just walk away from these Pharisees who are trying to attack me and kill me and stop me. And I am going to be found by the crowd. He met every single need. The second thing is this: the healing which each person received was not dependent on a conversation with Jesus. That is to say, they only needed to touch him, and the power that went out from him immediately met their need. No need was too much, and nothing was left unhealed, because his unlimited power functioned in the perfect knowledge and wisdom of God. You know, we need to believe God that he knows that he is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can ask or think. And sometimes the asking and the thinking, we talk ourselves out of trusting God because we have articulated so clearly what we think needs to be done. And sometimes I think God must look at us and just have great compassion and think they've asked me for something that doesn't even touch what needs to be touched. To put it another way, Jesus didn't have a limit. Not a limit on how many people, not a limit on what kind of need, not a limit of how often he would make himself available, not a limit on how severe. It wasn't a case of, well, we'll deal with the ones that have light ailments tonight because we don't want to put the demon possessed in amongst them. He was able to make that environment safe, and he was able to meet every need. It didn't matter how severe the needs were. If you came for healing or freedom, you received it, which is a wonderful example. And this whole week is about following as closely following Jesus as possible. And it is fantastic. But you might be wondering or questioning, how can that reasonably be applied to all of his people? And he healed them all. Well, I guess we need to think about how Jesus was able to function in that way. On another occasion, when his disciples decided they needed to stage an intervention, an entire city was crossing the fields towards him. It's after he speaks to the Samaritan woman at the well. She's gone and testified to who he is. And then at that point, he's still sat out by the well, and the people of the city are beginning to make their way out to him. In the meantime, his disciples urged him, saying, "Teacher, eat." This is John 4:31-36. But he said to them, "I have food to eat of which you do not know." Therefore the disciples said to one another, "Has anyone brought him anything to eat?" Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me, and to finish his work. Do you not say, there are still 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already white unto harvest. And he who reaps receives wages, and gathers fruit for eternal life, that both he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together." What Jesus reveals is that there is a supply to empower us for both life and service. We're not going to get into it tonight, but if you have a chance, read the parable of the minas. The parable of the minas. A minas was what a master would give their servant so that they had all the provision to do their task, to fulfill their purpose, but also to live while they did it. Typically, it was to last a year. So it would be the whole life cycle of the seasons, and they would get a provision which was both for their use and for their supply. Jesus says, look, we're in a reaping season. The fields are ready. And so we're in a reaping season. And if I go to reap, there is a supply, so that I'm not reaping in sorrow, but rather I have a reason to rejoice. This harvest belongs to the one who sowed it. But he's given me wages so that I can rejoice in the reaping. There is a supply. When we commit ourselves to God's purpose, there is a supply for life as well as for success. In doing that will for which he was sent, Jesus was receiving the abundant provision which the Father had set aside for that work. And so bless the Lord tonight. If you're serving the same purpose as Jesus, then you are promised the same quality and abundance of supply. No, we've mentioned it multiple times this week. Jesus tells us that the works that he does, it is the Father who does the works. He tells us that the words that he speaks are the words that he gets given to speak. And so in that respect, he is not the originator of the words, and he is not the doer of the works. Well, if we are serving God, and we don't have to be the one who is the originator of the words, and we don't have to be the one who is doing the works, then the same God who spoke the words and did the works in the life of Jesus can speak the words and do the works in our lives. No wonder Jesus says it's restful. There is power pouring out of him to this crowd. Crowd after crowd after crowd, need after need after need. But it's the life of the Father flowing into him and through him. Out of his innermost being is pouring a torrent of living water, life-giving water. And his promise to us is if we believe that is depend upon him, he will do the same in us. Out of our innermost being shall flow torrents of living, life-giving supply. So here's the bottom line. Following Jesus' example requires that we only ever minister according to the will of God for us in that work to which we have been sent, because that's where the supply has been provided. Anyone who knows me knows that I love the stories of Elijah and Elisha. And when Elijah is sent by God to the brook Kerith, where he's going to be fed by ravens, he's going to drink water from the brook, and it's one of the last places where there's going to be water. He can't take the principles and say, well, God is going to supply, and then go to a different brook. Because the ravens won't be showing up where he is. They'll be showing up where God sent them. So he needs to be in the same place as the supply. I meet so many people and they've jumped on a bandwagon. They've got enthusiastic about something which God may well have called someone else to be doing, and they've seen it and they've said, I want to be doing that. And it comes from a great heart. This is not a criticism, because their heart says, I really want to be a part of this. And so they go running after it, and it exhausts them. And they pour their resources into it, but their resources are finite, although often their resources are finance that they pour into it. And as they pour, they discover that there's no refreshing, there's no replenishing. And then religion tells them it's all about sacrifice, and it's all about how much will you surrender, and how much will you lose, and what will you. Jesus only says what the Father says, and he only does what the Father does. He fulfills what the Father sent him to do. There's an extraordinary power, a real release from obligation, a real release from the need to supply for ourselves, to maintain our own resources, to look after our own strength, or rest, or those things. When we say, God, I'm just going to do what you give me to do, so make it clear and I'll do it. And stop me when I shouldn't be, and put your hand over my mouth when I need to shut up. You see, because that's the exact opposite of triage. Triage assesses our resources, considers the needs, and then prioritizes those in need. Triage is based on our abilities. You see, because triaging the resources of God would be a nonsense. In our finite ability, we might say, well, how much money do we have to give? How many hours in the day do we have? How much strength do we have to meet these needs? What can we give? How many people can we actually reliably take care of, be in fellowship with? But we are those who draw from the infinite resources of Almighty God, from the immeasurable abundance of his grace, the riches of his grace displayed in his mercy towards not just us, but anybody else that is his. When we begin to triage the needs, when we begin to say, well, we have to prioritize that, or maybe we can focus on this aspect of what's going on in our community, or maybe we can minister to this kind of person, or maybe we can preach these particular elements of the truth, because that will become our emphasis. Then that mindset will rob us, and we will never know the abundant supply which Jesus enjoyed. See, the triage mindset is one of independence. It's one of personal limits. It's one of rights. It's a mindset that is the root cause of condemnation that is outlined by Jesus in John 3:18. That he speaks about because they have not believed. And the not believe phrase, psuome, it literally, it means they have not placed their confidence in, their trust, they have not committed to. When we have a triage mindset, we begin to ask ourselves the question, who will we turn away from the grace of God today? Who will we see continue in their suffering or their sorrow? But where we have a I will do the will of God mindset, there are times when God says, just walk away. And he'll only say that to you if he's going to meet the need in some other way. Because he loves that person, he cares for that person, he deeply desires their good. And he may have been supplying their good through his ministry in your life for a season, for a time period. But now it's important that they get it somewhere else because he's going to reveal some other aspect of his character. And it must be God who's saying it. It must be God who leads you to it. But you should trust, because trust relieves you of the burden of responsibility and acknowledges that it is God alone who does the work. But that does not mean that you don't have to participate in the work. You're just participating in perfect alignment and harmony, moving together with the whole of the body of Christ and God himself. You know, we see this most powerfully in the life of Jesus as he prays at the side of the grave of Lazarus. This is one of the strangest moments of prayer when you really think about what goes on. John 11:41-43. This is what Jesus prays. When they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying, Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me. Now, bear in mind, he hasn't prayed up to this point, but he has declared that he is the resurrection and the life. He has declared that Lazarus would live. He has responded to their reticence to open the tomb by challenging them. He said, did I not tell you that you would see the glory of God? That's the conversation the Father has heard. But he says, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. Now, when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And of course, Lazarus came forth, and they loosed him, and the rest of the story. It's John 11. You absolutely read that as often as you can as a declaration of who Jesus is. I'm always amazed by the complete lack of any requests in relation to Lazarus, or at all, really. Jesus doesn't pray, now, Father, I wasn't here, so I don't know why he died. So we need him to come back, but he mustn't be subject to that sickness. We don't just want him reanimated. He doesn't pray any detail. He doesn't pray, Father, get him out and make sure nobody else catches whatever it was he had, or any of those. His declaration doesn't mention the condition or the illness or any future state, any hopes or fears for Lazarus. The trust of Jesus, his absolute confidence, is this: Father, I know that you always hear me. If you were using your power and resources, then triage would be necessary. Because your power and your resources are finite, they are limited. And there is no guarantee that when you have expended your limited abilities, your limited resources, that they will be replenished. But, and I say this as gently as I can, if you are still using your own power and your own resources, please stop. Just stop. Because it's not meant to come from you. It's not meant to be that you deal with things with what belongs to you. But you need to reach into God for his provision for today's needs. He's not going to ask you to carry what you'll need a year, 10 years, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. He has grace for today. And you can reach into God for his supernatural provision for you. The reaper gets their wages. But also for the people that he sent you to, for the people in need. Whatever you're faced with, whatever the situation, if you were meant to be there, stop trying to fix it with your own limited reach, scope, and ability, but rather reach into God and say, God, give me the perfect gift. Give me the appropriate supply. God, move in power. Spirit of God, lead me into truth. God, deal with this circumstance through your work in me. God is able. And trust that he hears you. He hears you when somebody tells you that their life is hard, that they are facing, I don't know, whatever it might be, unemployment or sickness or a relationship breakdown or housing issues or any number of things, spiritual battles. He hears you. And when you declare he is able, and when you declare that you are relying on him, and when you declare that this is God who's going to work and God who moves, he hears you. And he delights to confirm that truth. If you pray, God, when I open my mouth, I want you to fill it, he will not only take you up on that, but he will be the demonstration, the confirmation of every word he puts in your mouth to say. And if when you reach back into God, you discover that there is no supply for that need, for that situation available to you, then please, please stop, because you're not meant to be there. One of the parts of the Old Testament that I love are the stories of Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. See, when we read those stories, and particularly if you grew up like I did around Sunday school, it's easy not to pick up on the fact that they are contemporaries, that they're the same age, that they're doing the same job over different provinces of Babylon. So every time you read about a king doing something appalling, and either Daniel or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego having to make a stand, the other is there. So when Daniel is thrown to the lions, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are nowhere to be seen. Daniel's making a great stand for truth. He won't bow the knee to anyone but the true God. He's making a great stand. Where are his friends? They're not there because they are not called to make that stand. In the same way as when they're being thrown in the fiery furnace, where's Daniel? It's not that he's off duty. It's not that somehow he's absent and he's hiding away. This is not cowardice. This is someone who is still in the will of God, but in the will of God is not the one called to make that stand. And the Bible doesn't condemn Daniel because when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are in the furnace, he's not there. It doesn't condemn them because when he's in with the lions, they are nowhere to be seen. Because in the purpose of God, you have a unique walk, a unique life, good works before ordained that you should walk in them. There are things you are called to that no one else is called to, things where you're called to be in fellowship, where you'll be around many people. But even in that, God has a supply for you, a perfect supply, and he hears you and he knows your need. And if you're serving the same purpose as Jesus, you're involved in the building of the kingdom, you're a fellow laborer with him, which is his promise to every child of God, then you are promised that he will provide for you the same quality and abundance of supply according to his riches in glory in Christ. So tonight I want to encourage you. If you've ever been caught up in the triage mindset, like it is so easy. I came out of industry before I started serving God in the way that I do today. And it's always about resources, and it's always about trying to get the most out of those resources and only committing to what is reasonable and all of those things. Yet when I look at the way that Jesus responds to a crowd so overwhelming, he's concerned that they might physically crush him. To a crowd demanding, at a time when he is under attack, at a time when his own family think he is losing his mind, and yet he heals them all. And when his disciples, who genuinely care for him, try and stage an intervention before all the Samaritans in that city come out to see him, Jesus says, look, I've got a supply that you don't know, you haven't experienced, but my supply, my food is to do the will of him who sent me. I believe that his promise that his yoke is easy and his burden is light and that there's rest for your souls is true. I believe that his promise of an abundant life is true. I believe his promise of fruitfulness, if we will just come under the authority of the word that he speaks over us, is true. And I believe this with all my heart, that we need to stop measuring the need, stop measuring what we think are our resources, and start saying, God, if I am meant to be here, you speak. If I'm not, you speak. You guide me so that I am where you sent me, because the God who sent me is my supply. And you, Father, hear me. No more triage. Let's live in trust. Let's not measure out what we think we have of the grace of God and say, well, it'll only go so far. It's enough. It's enough. God bless. Tomorrow night is our last night. Can't wait to share it with you. Really excited for it. I hope that it blesses you, and that this week comes to a place where it all sort of falls together. I'm sure that God, by his Spirit, can make sure that the things you were meant to receive, you've received. So I just have to trust that. I still find this whole online thing very weird after 2 years. But the Lord bless you, and thank you so much for joining with us. And God willing, we'll see you tomorrow.